Introduction to Flower Communion. Homily. That's short for sermon. Really short. Norbert Chapek and Flower Festival. Or Flower Communion, as we tend to call it here. Once upon a time, long ago and far away in Central Europe, in Bohemia, in the sunset days of the old Habsburg Empire, a child was born. He was born on the feast day of Saint Norbert, so his parents named him Norbert. Norbert Fabian Chapek. I believe one of the interim ministers who served you here was also called Norbert. Norm was actually Norbert. What was his last name? Norm Stewart. Norm Stewart. I believe his actual first name was Norbert. But this isn't about him. He was long after the Habsburg Empire. This Norbert, Fabian Chapek, was his mother's only son and his father's pride and joy. His father's gift to him was an inquiring mind. His mother's gift to him was a sense of wonder and awe and devotion. Bohemia's gift to him was a love of nature, a heritage of free religion, and a thirst for justice and independence. Remember that chalice that you see all over the place? The artist who created it drew on the tradition of Jan Hus, who was from Bohemia, because he said everybody should drink from the chalice, not just the priests. Norbert's father loved him dearly, but they were very poor country folk, so when their son was 12, he was 12 years old and old enough to go and start working for a living, which is the way it was in the good old days. Now just hang around in school for another 20 years. When he was 12, his parents sent Norbert to live in town and work for his uncle as a tailor's apprentice. So Norbert went to town and learned to cut and sew and make clothes. And he learned a lot of other things too. First, he learned that he and his uncle were not going to agree on matters of religion. In fact, one day his uncle threw him out of the house. No more tailor's apprentice for Norbert. But that all worked out okay, because Norbert's new friends in town saw that he was hardworking and intelligent and enthusiastic, so they sent him to school to learn to be a minister. Norbert became a very successful minister, taking his good news far and wide. Norbert also enjoyed working as a journalist, editing magazines and getting involved in politics. He worked for independence from the Habsburg Empire, and he preached against war. But war came anyway, the First World War in 1914. By this time, Norbert had 8 children. He was 44 years old. He had no wish to fight in the war, so he went to New York instead. In New York, Norbert was homesick for his own country, so he used to go to the New York Public Library because there he could read newspapers written in his own language, which was Czech. And that's where Norbert met his second wife, Maya. His first wife, alas, had died. He missed her very much, but he knew that being married and having a mother for his children was important. And he met Maya. She was homesick too, and she too liked to go to the public library to read the newspapers in Czech, so they could talk to each other in their own language. Maya and Norbert were married, and soon there were 11 children to love and care for and learn from. One day, some of Norbert's children went with friends to visit a Unitarian Sunday school. When they came home, they told their parents how much they had enjoyed it. And that's when Norbert discovered that all those years he had been a Unitarian without knowing it. So Norbert went to Meadville Lombard, which was a Unitarian theology school in Chicago. In fact, it still is, and a very good school indeed. And that's how, at the age of 48, Norbert Chapek became a Unitarian minister. Soon the First World War was over, and Norbert and his family were able to go home to Bohemia, which was now called Czechoslovakia. So that's what they did. Norbert went back home, back to the great city of Prague, and there he founded a Unitarian church. Norbert's new church in Prague soon became the biggest Unitarian church in the whole world, with over 3,000 members. The church building was so big It covered a whole city block. The congregation called their new church the Liberal Fellowship. They called that big building Unitaria. They wanted their new church to be different from other churches, but they still needed prayers and hymns, so Norbert wrote new words and new music. Some of those hymns and prayers are still with us in English in our grey hymnals. But still, Norbert felt they needed something more, some new tradition that would symbolize both unity and diversity, how every person had different gifts to offer, and how we each learned from one another. So in 1923, Norbert Chapek and the people of the Prague Church started a new tradition, Flower Festival. On a Sunday in spring, at the last service before they broke for summer holidays, each person brought a flower to church, as we have done today. In Edmonton, you don't do this till the very last Sunday in June because there's no flowers, there's still snow around. But I digress. At the beginning of the service, each person put their flower in a big vase at the front of the church. The flowers symbolize the people. The vases symbolize the church, where folks come together and there is room for everyone. At the end of the service, each person came forward and took away a different flower, symbolizing how we learn from one another. And that is what we are doing here today, as many other Unitarian congregations do each year, all across the country and in many other countries also. We follow the tradition of Flower Festival or Flower Communion and celebrate how we learn from one another. Norbert Chapek made many friends in his life. He was a cheerful, hopeful person. He taught people to cherish their friendships and learn from one another. Even in hard times, and he would know some very hard times, people were glad to know him because he chose to be cheerful and affectionate and welcoming. Even in hard times, he was glad to be alive and be part of the universe. And so at Flower Festival, let us remember the teachings of Norbert Chapek. Let us remember how we learn from one another. Let us remember to be glad and thankful. May it be so.